All right, we're here at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, and now we have the opportunity to delve even further into the Africa-Israel relationship with three amazing guests. We have Habtom Mahari.
Abdul Mahari.
We have Jonathan Takale.
Yes.
Takale.
Yes.
Yes. And then we have Klaas, Mokgomole.
Yeah.
Yes. Now, these gentlemen actually represent three different African nations. Of course, Jonathan Takale, he is Ethiopian Jew who made Aliyah in
1990.
1990. This was shortly after Operation Moses, right? So it was Operation
After
Solomon.
Operation Moses,
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
And we have, of course, Habtom. He actually is a refugee from Eritrea in 2008, right? And then, of course, Klaas is from South Africa. So we have an African diaspora around the table. Of course, me from America. I'm Dumisani, Washington, with the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel, and we partner with the JCPA. So, gentlemen, there's so much to get into. We know that the Bible calls Israel the lights of the nations, Jerusalem, all nations flowing. You have this concept here at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs for it to be a center, an international hub for nations to come and connect to Israel and the Jewish people, right, in a very substantive way. And among many other things, there's a conference that's happening in late March. So if you're watching this after March, you may have missed it, but there's a conference coming up in late March that is an Africa-Israel Security Conference. And that security means food security, it means national security in terms of counterterrorism, those types of things. So I want to start here. First of all, each of you take a moment and tell us who you are, right? Give us a little bit of background about you, and let's get into this conversation. Habtom, we'll start with you.
Oh, okay. My name is Abdul Mahari. I am Eritrean from. I just arrived in Israel in 2008. I'm a refugee in Israel. I'm also doing a PhD at the Hebrew University.
And what's your major? What is your focus?
I'm doing sociology and anthropology. So I'm doing related to social networks.
Yes, sir.
So I have a family, 2 children, blessed with 3 children, and my wife. I live in Jerusalem, the holy place. So this is about me.
Amen.
I came from Eritrea. Eritrea is located in the Horn of Africa. It is it's a bit between next to Saudi Arabia, Ethiopia, Djibouti, and Yemen. And it is this is about me in short, and we will discuss.
Amazing. Amazing. Jonathan, you, sir.
My name is Jonathan Takale. I made Aliyah in 1990 after Operation Moses. I made Aliyah alone. Actually, I researched my Jewish identity because my father, he was a Jewish, my mother, she's Christian, but I didn't know who's my father.
Yes.
So when I finished my high school, I start to research who am I, some kind of identity crisis, and I got it my family in Gondar, and within 3 months I made Aliyah in Israel. And I studied Hebrew 1.5 years. After that I served 2.5 years in IDF, and I studied hotel management. I was working King David Hotel. After that I started 23 years ago in Israeli Knesset as a coordinator logistics. I'm married. I have 3 girls. That's yes.
So quick question. You said me Aliyah alone, meaning you're the only one of your immediate family who...
No, alone. I made Aliyah alone.
Alone, just
after
you.
11 years, my mom, she
came after.
She came and she joined me.
Wow,
Yeah.
wow. That's amazing. I want to ask some questions about that.
Yeah.
And then Klaas, tell us about you, sir.
Klaas Mokgomole from South Africa. I'm mainly from the northern part of South Africa, from a province called Limpopo, from a very small town called Zanin, in a very small village called Motlatlare in Sunnyside. So, but I'm mainly based now in Johannesburg. I coordinate an organization of young scholars and activists called Africans for Peace. So what we do with Africans for Peace, we find ways to bring about solutions to the African problem, being security, and we find ways to sort of combat racism in Africa, in South Africa. We fight against anti-Semitism, we fight against Islamophobia, and we do a number of things. Activism, we write, we do discussions, we get on TV and radio, sort of get involved in debates and discussions all over social media as well. So yeah, that's the kind of organization that I run.
And Klaas, for those who already don't know your story, you do all of those amazing things. Several years ago, you were on the other side of that where the Israel debate was concerned. Give us a little bit of that picture, sir.
Oh yeah, because obviously I'm from a very political background. From my high school, I've been a member of the African National Congress, the ANC, the party that Nelson Mandela belonged to. Then continued with my activism when I passed my matric. I went to Wits University. I continued with my activism, and I was in the student government. That's when I got introduced to the anti-Israeli organizations. So I'm not going to mention their names because I don't want to glorify them like that. So I joined the anti-Israel organizations, and what we used to do was to sort of antagonize the life of the Jewish students on campus. We used to do a number of things. We used to insult them. We used to have a lot of messages were talking about killing the Jews and stuff like that. So, but what happened is obviously I was facing expulsion on campus for exceeding the bounds of protest. Then later on, that's when I had an opportunity to come to Israel to learn about the conflict, and I realized that those organizations that are anti-Israel, they're actually preaching hatred. They are preaching anti-Semitism, and they're not in any way trying to help the Palestinian cause. They're there for themselves. They're there just for their personal interests. So that's why I decided, no, man, I'm not going to be part of this. I need to find ways, meaningful ways, to come up with solutions to sort of help or come up with ideas that can sort of bring the parties on a table to negotiate. Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
So, gentlemen, here we are in Jerusalem talking about the security, not just the conference, but Africa's relationship with Israel. Of course, our organization, we within the Black American community, we talk about the African diaspora and its connection. We talk about Zionism from the days of W.B. Du Bois and Dr. King and all of those things. Now we're in the reality of this new Middle East. There's an Abraham Accords, right? And over the last several years, the UAE and Morocco and Sudan, these formerly hostile nations, or at the very least distant nations to Israel, are now making peace with Israel, right? African nations that have had close ties with Israel for a long time are reaffirming those ties, right? And this is part of what the reality, even as this conference is coming. Say something to us, first of all, Habtom, Eritrea. I know that one of the CEO, Dr. Yekiel Leiter, was just in Addis Ababa. He had a conference, and several of the nations in the African nations were represented there. And he talked about food security. I believe Eritrea may have been one of those nations, but talk to us about both Eritrea and East Africa, that perception or relation to Israel. What do you see, particularly in the context of this whole Abraham Accords? What do you see from your perspective?
I mean, look, I was last time there was an putting Israel into African observatory status, right?
Yeah.
Yes,
I was very amazed by
the African Union. Yes,
Yes.
the African Union. I was
Yes,
amazed by
observer state.
I mean, South Africa and Eritrea. Eritrea was one of the countries who opposed Israel's African. By the way, Israel was had a status, African Union observatory status, but then they rejected it after Gaddafi rejected it, and then they don't want to return it. You know, the Emirate is there, Arab Emirate Union is there, China is there, everybody is there.
Yes, sir.
They just singled out Israel.
Yes.
And I was amazed at the African countries. I mean, you know, as an African, I just get the only inspiration that for good governance, for democracy, for technology, for industrialization, for, you know, Israel is the only. I mean, you look there, you don't have anything. You just see Israel is the only inspiration in the Middle East.
Wow.
And Africans, instead of getting this inspiration from Israel, and
Yes,
having Israel being an observer status there, they
Yes,
just rejected it. It's just
sir.
unbelievable.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
And I was very, 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 you know, I personally, my background is I'm a Tigrinya nation, and the Tigrinya nation, our religion is a mix of the Orit religion, the Torah, and the Christianity.
Okay.
And
Yes, sir.
and you know, the Jewish, although they are majority in Israel, in their land,
Yes, sir.
but they are tiny minorities in the Middle East.
Yes, sir.
And then they have to be protected, right?
Yes, sir. Yes,
And
sir.
at the same thing, we, the Tigrinya, we are majority in our country, but we are tiny minority. And I have a very, very deep understanding of what the challenges of Israel. And Israel is the only country that's singled out in Africa to be observatory status, and was very, very bad for. I mean, that's just unbelievable. And I think Africans, in Africa, if you see in the Middle East, in the whole, the only inspiration for good governance, for democracy, for development, for technology, it's Israel.
Yeah.
It's amazing, and I'm going to pivot here to Klaas coming here, because even though Israel, like you said, isolated, was removed from the African Union after Gaddafi, as you said, regained that observer status now, but now there are still some that are trying to remove it again. When I don't want to say the name wrong, but the person who was the responsible for making the decision, I think Faki Mahamat, I may be saying his name incorrectly, please forgive me. He actually presented a paper to the African Union explaining why he made the decision. And in the paper, and our organization actually did an article on it by Olga Mashwe, we actually talked about the fact that Israel has relations with 83% of Africa. In other words, there is the rhetoric that comes from the leadership often, which may be anti-Israel, but on the ground, it's a very different reality. So Klaas from South Africa, we know that the ANC, the African National Congress, is the ruling party, has an official, I could say, hostile stance to Israel. It doesn't, won't have an embassy, those types of things. But tell us of the difference. There's a disconnect from that to South Africans on the ground when it comes to Israel.
Yeah, I think, Africa is controlled by politics, and unfortunately our leaders most of them are captured. And we are sort of living in a misfortune where our leaders are not visionaries. Because now, if you look at the politics now, most of the African countries that are visionaries, they can see the importance of having relationship with Israel. Most of the African countries will just allow China to come into Africa and not benefit Africa. China will come into Africa and sort of reap everything. They'll come there and exploit. They will take the mineral resources and everything. Most of the African countries are in debt because of the relationship they had with China. But instead of African countries developing a relationship with Israel where we can sort of benefit fully with the water technology, we already have a water crisis in Africa. We have a number of countries that don't have water. They still get water by the river, and the water is not even clean. That's why we have this problem of cholera and other things. So we're not having that, like electricity, a number of things. So, but when you look at South Africa, the government, because of the relationship they had with the likes of Yasser Arafat, South African government, the ANC, he had a good relationship with Yasser Arafat from back in the days during the time of apartheid. That's why they still want to maintain that by being loyal to the cause of Palestine. But they are not really benefiting the whole country. An ordinary person in South Africa, or maybe even anywhere in Africa, when they wake up, they don't think about the Middle East. They don't think about the conflict between Israel and Palestine. They think about their immediate needs. We have a high unemployment rate in Africa. We have high crime rate. We have a lot of things like gender-based violence. We're still dealing with HIV and AIDS to this day in Africa. We still don't have a solution to that. And that's why we feel like Israel can come into the play, can sort of assist in coming up with solutions, can bring about solutions to not just South Africa, not just SADC, but the whole of Africa can sort of learn a lot from Israel and can actually benefit a lot from Israel.
So all these connections, Jonathan, then shortly after Operation Moses, which was 1984, I remember because I was a senior in high school. I remember seeing the pictures. Solomon, I think, was 1991, so you kind of in between those, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Here you make Aliyah from Africa, right? The Jewish community there for millennia. Talk to us for a moment about the perception of Israel in Ethiopia, right, or East Africa. What do you see in terms of how Israel is perceived in terms of its relationship there?
That's a good question. When I grow up in my home, in my city was Nazareth. Nazareth is also you have here in Israel, and some cities in Ethiopia also they have Hebrew name, like Kfar Tabor, you have in Ethiopia Debre Tabor, and Har Zetim, you have Debre Zeit. So from my kid time, I remember my uncle always he talked about Israel from the Ethiopian Orthodox perspective, and always also he was pray for Jerusalem. I hear always, Israel like my home.
Yes.
This is a part of what he said also. It is a Judo-Christian.
Yes, sir. Yes,
so
sir.
it's not new when I hear my father he's a Jew. What do you mean my father he's a Jew? How I have a right in Israel? And I meet some officials from Israeli embassy, and they explain my right, and I prepare myself to come in Israel as Israeli, as black, as Ethiopian, as a Jew. That means for my natural identity. Okay. So when I arrived in Israel, also I study Hebrew, and I tried to integrate within Israeli society. And the Jewish Agency help us a lot of ways to integrate in Israeli society, the law, everything. So I don't think so I had a problem when I make Aliyah.
Yes,
also I meet my family, there is a lot of Ethiopians.
Yes,
so it was very simple to me.
You mentioned your grandfather praying for Jews, or your father? You said your
My father.
Your father. He would pray for, like in the scripture, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. And Habtom, you talked about that mixture, the Jewish and the Christian, that combination of it. Right? It's based in Torah, and there's also the belief in the New Testament and everything, that it's so strong. You, Jonathan, in the Black American tradition, Zion, Jerusalem, throughout, right? Always songs about Zion, songs about Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And one of the things that triggered, I won't remember the gentleman's name, but just recently I learned of Black Americans who signed up to fight for Ethiopia against the invasion from Italy.
Yeah.
And there was, it was against the law. The State Department wouldn't let them go, right? But this is how inspired these black men from Harlem and a couple of other cities as well signed up to go and fight the fascism that was coming to Ethiopia. In other words, here we are in this time period, this connection to Africa, right? Even in the diaspora in the United States, right? Or during the apartheid movement, the anti-apartheid movement was so strong in the United States of America, right? This concern for Africa, right? We're seeing that as Africa and this embrace Jerusalem, this new era that I keep saying gets ushered in with the whole Abraham Accords and the Arab lands. Habtom, you came here fleeing, and what did you, fleeing Eritrea, did you already have a perception of Israel before you came?
Oh yeah. I mean, look, it's my father. He my father is supposed to be Christian, but he also he always reads Islam, right? That's what he reads all the time.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And my father is a priest.
Yes, sir.
So he's an Orthodox Christian.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So we have a very as a society, we have very close connection to Jerusalem. Hebrew, the Hebrew language, and the and the Torah and the Judaism is native, is indigenous to this land. So in our church,
yes, sir.
Because our families cannot come to Jerusalem, so they brought Jerusalem to their villages.
Wow.
So whenever they go in the morning to pray, they just go to Jerusalem. That's very the connection is so strong.
Yes.
Yes.
And I thought that Israel was in a holy place, and then when I came here also, I just it became very important for me to understand, and also you see the delegitimization of Israel, particularly this propaganda, mainly among blacks and African Americans, and also in Europe. So I just tried to get and understand, and then it's really Israel and Zionism is an inspiration for us. Even it is this Jewish that came here and they became independent and they created this. And Africans, we just get from empires. And then the Zionism is an inspiration for us, and even for the African Americans in the U.S.
Yes, sir.
I see, I see under a lot of propaganda and everything is, but Israel is an amazing country. It's amazing. It's just so my understanding was that they were just going to the holy place. I'm just going, and then I wouldn't, when you come here, you see it's really really holy place. And I never lived outside of Jerusalem since I came here, except 2 years in Bushit. Jerusalem is a special place, and this was my expectation, and it is a holy place.
Yes, sir.
And
just to ask something there, what do you think of this sort of liberal movement from South Africa or even Africa that says that we should stop being immigrants, we should stop going to Europe, going to North America, we should stay in Africa and solve our problems because we cannot run away from our problems? What do you think of
no, I mean that we can connect that to the things that you said in the previously, and also you raised about the leadership and the grassroots, the ordinary Africans is not the same. The ordinary Africans, they wanted a good house, a good services, transportation, a good housing services, a good health services, and everything else. But the politicians, that's not what they wanted. They just the politics is completely different, and corruption and everything else. For example, in Eritrea, there is no reason to deny Israel to be observatory status in the African Union, right? So Africans, we need to create economy in the continent in order to. Otherwise, without economy, you can't. If you don't have economy, then you have to leave your country and search a better, or even democracy works. If you have economy, then you can run democracy. Democracy is an expensive business. Without financing the courts, without financing the police, without financing the city, you can't have even democracy. So we need to create economy, and that's we can bring Israel into this perspective. You can get our economy, we can get technology. We have in our doorsteps the technology. China became industrialized because of Japan's technology. We have in our doorstep Israel's technology. Why don't we embrace Israel and get its technology? Israel is willing to give. There's a water technology, water in agriculture and everything else. So the idea is, in order to stop being refugees, we need to create economy in our continent. In order to create our continent, we have to think in that way, not trying to.
This is so. So what you, Klaas, powerful, and Habtom, this conversation here, you're talking about, Klaas, those the almost like two schools of thought. One says you stay and you rebuild your country.
Yes.
The other one says that we have to, and I'm assuming you help me, Habtom. Was yours as a political refugee? Was it? Yes. So I leave. Both the Sudanese and the Eritrean refugee community here. Some have said that they want to go see their nation repaired and then return to help build it up. Do you hear that here among the Eritreans?
No, we have an organization, and we are every day working to go back home and industrialize our country. In Eritrea, what's happening is social engineering. It's almost ethnic cleansing. It is we have a communist leader, a dictator, who's trying to destroy this Judeo-Christian values from the country and create a new Eritrean nationalism created by fascist Italians. By the way, we talk about, I was just, I hear people talking about apartheid Israel. Apartheid was first experienced even before South Africa and Eritrea by the Italians. And I know what it is to be in apartheid. I know in Israel, I'm doing my PhD. You don't. A black person from Africa did not do PhD in apartheid state, right? During the Italians, we were allowed only to study until 4th grade. We were not allowed to enter to commistato.
Up to 1st grade.
Up to 4th grade.
Wow.
Yeah. No. Wow. It's like to humiliate and joke about those people who passed apartheid.
No, that's
to call Israel an apartheid state. It's not completely an apartheid. It's not even. It's just you can blame Israel for many things, but not for apartheid.
Yeah.
So we have a strong organization, and we wanted to go back home, and we even have a program, and we want to go back home, and we wanted to people to have a freedom of religion, but also we wanted to create democracy, and we wanted to create economy, and we wanted to be live with respect in our country. So there are organizations here, and I'm part of it. We have our organization is called ASEAN Movement, and we're very active. So yes, there is.
Yeah, I think the reason I was asking that is because I remember back in, I think, between 2016 and 2019, there were articles saying the Ethiopian Jews are not treated well in Israel. They are forced to take a pill, or they're forced to put a chip that sterilizes their women. There was also another article where the sort of African descendants of, whether from Eritrea or from Ethiopia, they were called cancer to the society of Israel. There was a point where I'm not sure if these articles were true, because I didn't have sources to sort of authenticate if the articles were true, where they said a group of Eritrean migrants were sort of rejected and were sort of prevented from entering Israel. I don't know if you have heard of that before. Yeah,
I mean, there are this, the Israeli. We have to differentiate between the state's policy and the country and people, right? So, for example, it was a right-wing government, and when Israel allowed to enter the Eritreans and give them a temporary protection, a temporary group protection, but there are also right-wing politicians who calls for the removal of the asylum seekers, but Israel is a democracy, and its democracy allows in the courts and the judges, it allows people to be protected, minorities to be protected, and because of that, even despite the government's decision to deport asylum seekers, but the asylum seekers still lives and works because Israel is it's the only democracy in the Middle East. You can't find democracies in the Middle East that if you are in Egypt, they will deport you back, or if you are in Sudan, they will deport you, or in Saudi Arabia. But in Israel, you've got it's a real democracy. It's not a democracy-like country. So the asylum seekers, the refugees are protected by the court. Even a right-wing government who's a refugee hater cannot get you out of the country. So there were right-wing politicians who calls for the deportation of asylum seekers, for the return of asylum seekers. And there is still a part of the government, for example, that are calling for the deportation of the asylum seekers, the refugees. But the refugees are protected by the court, and they're working, allowed to work by the court. And I'm even allowed to study, and I'm studying, and I'm doing my PhD. So this is the situation in Israel.
I'm glad you brought that up, Klaas. As Habtom was explaining, during some of those pieces that you may have seen, you may have also seen that there were big protests.
Of course.
There were Israelis joining in with Eritrean and Sudanese refugees protesting, and it's amazing that when you talk about democracy, only in a democracy can you protest. You can't protest in Ramallah. You can't protest in Gaza City, right? You can't. And during apartheid, you could not protest. And we saw what happened to the protesters. And that's oftentimes when we talk to people about Israel and that Black and African perspective, sometimes it'll get projected to the rest of the world in a very negative light. But when you do the digging, you'll see not only is it a healthy democracy, right? But you also see that when it comes to something like how Israel treats refugees as compared to how Italy treats refugees, and how people will be not just deported, they'll be stopped, they'll be turned away. Some of the nations shoot, as if they are military invaders and actually harm them. We knew that in the Sinai, Hamas and others, there's all kinds of, I don't want to even say what those things are, but there were some very horrible things that were happening, right? When the stories would be told, they would never tell those parts of the story. They would always tell about the story. And yes, there were even some the racist politicians and some Israelis as well.
And that's also, if you go to Europe, there are racist politicians who say, we have to get all these refugees back. Even Africans who stayed a lot of years there, we have to get them out, right? Even in the U.S., you have all this many politicians who cause otherwise, right? But the democracy protects the minorities, and Israel is a real democracy in the Middle East.
I understand.
And we have.
I just want to ask Jonathan, because we living in a world where identity matters. I remember when I was in the States, there was a debate whether we should call like someone like Dumisani in Washington, whether we should call him a black American or an African American, because some of them were not even born in Africa. So then if we call him African American, what about those who are sort of direct migrants in America? And we go to the Netherlands, there were a lot of black people that were sort of having identity crisis, whether we call them the Dutch or we call them Africans. See, same thing that happened when you go to France. The black people of France are called the French. You don't say the black French or like you see stuff like that. So question is, do you have an identity problem as an Ethiopian, or what do you consider yourself? Do you consider yourself an Israeli, or you have a way to sort of tag your name or tag yourself?
I don't think so. I have a problem personally in this identity crisis. Just I was till I didn't know who is my father because he killed by communists. So my mom, she didn't tell me, and that was some kind of problem.
Yes, sir. Yes,
but from my Ethiopianism, from my Judaism, from my Israelism and my Blackism, it is a natural. So people can talk, you know, I are Israeli, black, Israeli, something. But I have a resource. I have a grassroots. I born in Ethiopia. My grandfather, my grandmother from my mother's side, and also I meet my family from my father's side. All of them, they know always to keep this identity, Ethiopianism. So from that natural Ethiopianism, you have also a Jewish identity. I have that is natural, and also my color is black. I am, you know, so we are. You are African American, but I was in 2007 in Los Angeles when the State Department invited me. The African American community invite me, and home hospitality just they asked me how you are Ethiopian. This is not good question. Though I asked him how you are African American, but which country from Africa you born? I know I born in Ethiopia. Okay. So always.
So they were challenging your identity.
Yes, sir. Yes, so I don't have a problem. The last 33 years in Israel, also when I went in abroad, this kind of identity crisis.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
But sometimes, you know, most of the Ethiopians come from countryside in Israel. You know, the countryside and Israel. So there is a gap.
Yes, sir.
That gap maybe sometimes the Ethiopians, you know, make some kind of problem. So from abroad, you know, media or anti-Israelis, they can use that kind of like Louis Farhan, okay? He said something 20 or 25 years ago.
Yes, sir. Yes,
because of the blood or something like that.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
They use it. But originally, we have a natural identity, Ethiopians.
Yes, sir.
Also within Eritrean brothers.
Yes, sir.
You know, my wife, she's Eritrean, and I have 3 kids. The kids also, they know what is the flag of Ethiopia, what's the flag of Eritrea, what's the flag of Israel. I learned them. So at the end of the day, the education can make good awareness for identity.
So I do this organically, so I know I'm a time thing, I'm going to have to wrap up, but I want to do this before we end. Jonathan, just one last thing. The Ethiopian Aliyah, which began, of course, in 1984. We know that before we talked, we have your cousin is a friend of mine, Yafa Takele.
Yeah.
So her dad, of course, Baruch Takele, and I've learned about that story. This amazing biblical proportion story of the Aliyah, before the Red Sea diving resort, there were these very brave Ethiopian Jews who are coordinating with the Mossad, and they're getting the Ethiopian Jews out of Ethiopia. Here, Israel, I believe in 2012, declared that the Sigid is the celebration that's now a national holiday. You have the Kes, the Ethiopian priests. They come and bring these traditions.
Yes.
And Israel embraces these traditions as the family that had been scattered, now they're bringing. What does it mean for you to see something like that, the Ethiopian Jewish tradition, embraced on a national level here in the land of Israel?
First of all, it's proud for me. And also, when they been in Ethiopia, they pray always to arrive in Israel, to Jerusalem, always.
Yes,
After that, they continue for generation to generation, also for the rest of Israelis to learn that kind of custom. When the first time, from Ulpan, from Kafr Sava, they bring us for this celebration, the first time I hear Sigd. So I start to ask the case in Amharic, okay? They explain everything based on Torah and also based on history of Ethiopian Jews from Gondar or some areas.
Yes,
So to me, it's a very, very good proudness to see that kind of sect, especially after the history of Ethiopian Christianity, Orthodox, from Queen of Sheba, the second event of Ethiopian Jewish celebration in Jerusalem and Holy Land.
Wow.
So that's very...
And I think also the beauty of Israel is that it has Ethiopian Jewish from Ethiopia, Black Jewish from Africa, from Yemen, from Tunisia, from Europe, from Russia. And it's a mosaic, right? It's not a it's not like we white Americans and blacks. It's not. It's a mosaic of many different identities coming together and living in harmony. And that's amazing.
Habtom, in a moment, we're going to do a separate segment because I want to talk about your journey coming here. And I'm so glad you said that. And I hate trying to end these things because you can keep talking. I want to ask some more questions. I'm going to say some things. But to that point, the mosaic that you have Sudanese, Eritrean, Ethiopian. I mean, there's Nigerians. They're from the Igbo community. They're actually here, and people, as we said, don't know that. In the West, they don't understand that. They don't, either they've been told negative things about Israel, or they have their own stereotypical thing. Oh, it's a Jewish state, and they think that if it's Jewish, maybe everybody who walks around looks like Jerry Seinfeld or looks like somebody stereotypically Ashkenazi. And yes, they're Ashkenazi, and there's Mehari and Beta Israel and all of that, and Jewish and non-Jewish. It's such an amazing place. So when we go back to a conference where the African representatives are coming here in a few weeks, right? To come and have conversations about food security, all those things. Some of them are going to come and see a Jerusalem that they maybe didn't anticipate, right? And see a Jerusalem and a JCPA that is embracing, and I believe, again, ushering in another era of prosperity, of security, right, in these states. And that's why your question is so powerful, Klaas, about that some are leaving some of these states, but as you said, leaving in, like many of the dissident South Africans, some of them fled temporarily because of the violence of what was happening with them in the apartheid era, knowing, like Thabo Mbeki, who went to the UK, my friend Noba Timbo, who went to the United States, but they said to themselves, we will return and rebuild our nation. This rebuilding where Africa is concerned, this Zionism that's actually affecting the continent, right, in a very, very powerful way. Gentlemen, you represent almost like a dawning of that actually happening, and that's why we get so excited and sharing that with black pastors and leaders in the United States for them to see and to be a part of that as well. So first of all, I want to thank you, each and every one of you. Your stories are all powerful, and I know that as people are seeing this, they will respond, they will be inspired as well to do even more research, get more information, and we're excited to share it as we're in the States for the Black American community to see what's happening here in Jerusalem, the all nations coming here to Zion. So thank you, and thank you for joining us, everyone.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you.